One thing I would advise is, and kids these days are getting better at doing this, find your passion, but whatever work you need to do to get to your passion may not be a linear path. So as you and I have done, we worked in jobs we didn't necessarily like, building blocks, right? But have that work ethic, and a work ethic will get you much further in life than a chance to do your one thing you're passionate. But as long as you know when to switch it around.
Welcome to Helpmebuy Property Podcast. Today we are going to talk about a friend, a property entrepreneur who went from doing casual small jobs selling cash registers to building a property empire. His name is Goro Gupta. We are going to share a story of how he became a successful property entrepreneur. How did that transition work from this sales agent selling cash registers at the age of 17 and 16 to basically becoming a massive property entrepreneur running a big ethical property investment group. We are also going to talk about the biggest failures in his life and what was the learning process, the big turning points, and how did he use those adversities to turn his life around and become the man he has become today. We're also going to talk about his life in relation to self-development and the ecosystem that he has managed to build around the NDIS investing space. And in just order to sum all of this up, why should people trust him? Thank you for listening to me today. Have a wonderful day. Talk about Goro being the property entrepreneur right now. Who was Goro as a young person?
It's interesting. So remember I told you I was part of that business network.
Yes.
And one of the things we have to do for our retreat is do what we call our lifeline.
Yeah.
And so earlier today, I was doing exactly that and you look at your life from when you were 0 to where you are now. And it's like 55 key pivotal moments or core memories, as millennials call it these days, right? I'm a millennial, so I can't say too much about that. But there's some core memories there. And one of the key things I remember, until I was 16, maybe 16 and a half, I was the biggest introvert and nerd you would ever meet.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I can resonate with that. I think a lot of people that I meet, including Ethan Donati and Gary Vee, by the way, because I've asked these questions to them, they classify themselves as introverts. They're like, you don't like talking. Yes, we can come out on stage and talk, but this is us putting a facade. So I completely, I can see where this is coming from. So what changed?
Well, there was a few things that were the key catalysts, right? My dad purchasing a business when I was 15, and then my dad actively deciding, Goro, you're going to work in every single job in this business, and you're going to learn everything. And so it was a cash register company. And now it seems like a cash register company, there's not many jobs. We had the service division, we had the sales division. We had at one stage 24 employees working for us, right?
So building cash registers, basically.
No, selling and servicing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's only 3 companies or 2 companies in all of Victoria that does that. And back in 97, every shop needed a cash register, right? And so that was one of the key catalysts. But one of the other catalysts was a family friend came over, and still to this day, he tells this story. I was apparently on my laptop doing work, and I'd come in to the kitchen, grabbed a bite to eat, and said a moderate hi and walked back out. He's like, apparently he had a chat to my parents saying, what's wrong with your son? Is everything okay? Right? And he was like, he ignored me. I was on the computer and and his brother-in-law was like my best friend in Dubai where I grew up. And so, obviously my parents did a few things after that because they valued his opinion. He's, he's a very inspirational man. And so one of the other things Dad did was start getting me into property and business events, which he was attending when I was 16. Right? So, and then as a consequence of that, one of my roles in the cash register company, and this is a trial by fire, I was going door to door as a 16-year-old, having to build rapport with the shopkeeper and sticking stickers on the cash register where they keep all their freaking money and selling them paper rolls or cash registers and things like that because, we were doing, one of our main income streams was consumables.
Yeah.
Right? And so I built myself up from a complete introvert to having to be able to, I guess, straddle that line into extrovert when I needed to at that time. Yeah. And so...
was it hard?
Of course it was hard. Nothing worth doing is easy, right?
100%.
Right.
And you need that one person to push you, right? I still remember, like, when I first came to Australia, right? Biggest introvert in the world. My first job was a petrol station, at a petrol station.
Of course it was.
And yeah, it's the biggest stereotype, right? Yeah. But hey, look at me here, right? And it's so funny, like the business owner there, and I talk about this story in my book as well, right? The business owner there, his name is still Eddie. I still talk to him right now, right? Like still these days. It was a BP station on Sydney Road. I still remember. I still go past and I show my kids that I used to work here. Anyways, that guy had this line, Moss, don't be a banana, have that's all every time he would say this to me, right? And it seeped into my head, right? Don't be a banana, like in his Egyptian accent, right? And basically that was the push that I needed, basically. I remember there was a junkie that came in the petrol station once, completely drugged out, drunk, and I switched off the petrol station. I was scared of telling him off and asking him to that I turned off the lights and I closed the petrol station for the whole night. Like seriously, no sale at all. And this is on Sydney Road petrol station, right? Wow. And he came up in the morning and he didn't fire me. And he gave me the biggest lecture of his life. He's like, you're a excuse my French, you are, this is not how it works. And he took me out. So because the guy was so out of whack that he stayed there all night and he was there in the morning at like 7, he took me out with holding my hand and he said, slap him. And I was like, no, I'm not slapping him. He's like, no, slap him because this is how you're going to learn. And so I shook him up and I said, man, you need to go. Like in the nicest possible way. I didn't slap him, but that was the push. Like, so everyone has that turning point, right, in their life. And so from your story's perspective, how did that change? Like when you talk about, going to those property seminars, how did all of that started feeling real and, moving into this space?
Well, it almost starts as a journey from my first property.
Yeah.
Right? And so I went to all these property seminars. I was reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I'd bought in. I was all into this philosophy, right? And Dad was buying properties. He'd purchased like 4 or 5 properties within the 1 year, knowing all these strategies. And I was doing, I'd actually started another business within Dad's business, doing the computerized point of sale, which is what everyone does, right? Touchscreens.
Yeah.
So, that was doing well. And then Mom and Dad said, you're doing so well. You basically got your own business. You're 17. We want to give you a gift for your 18th, right?
Sure.
And they said, you've got a choice. We can buy you this dream car, this Lexus coupe you've been dreaming of. It has beautiful pearl white Lexus on the background of my computer screen. Like everyone had seen it. They knew I talked to everyone I knew about it. Or we can pay for your deposit on your first property.
Nice.
And as much as
it was a car. No, I'm just kidding.
Of course. It was the first property. Now, that wasn't the best property purchase. I learned a thing or two from that purchase.
Yes.
But it got me in the game.
Yeah.
And it got me, responsible for my financial outcomes.
Of course. And how old were you at that time?
17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I had a mortgage by the time that it was an off-the-plan property, an apartment in the CBD, which I'd never do again.
Fraternity house or something like that.
No, dude. One of the times I went out clubbing, and I was one of my friends when I went out clubbing. I'm like, well, let me drop you off home. I drop her off home. Turns out it's my freaking apartment. I was going out clubbing, and one of my friends lived in one of my places. But no, look, in 10 years' time, it had grown 50%. Now people go, oh, Goro, it grew 50%. Yeah, but also I purchased a property when I was 19. 2 years after that, that went 2.5 times in that same time.
Of course.
So there's the opportunity cost.
Of course.
I liaise with that.
Yeah.
But once again, as I said, as an 18, 19-year-old with a mortgage, people say, oh, it's easy, your parents gifted it to you. That thing was still negatively geared. I still had to pay money out of my pocket and be responsible for it.
And so if you think about your, say, 19-year-old self or 17-year-old self, people who are out there right now who are 17 and 19, what is one advice that you would give to them that you couldn't give to yourself back then?
It's an interesting question. One thing I would advise is, and kids these days are getting better at doing this, find your passion, but whatever work you need to do to get to your passion may not be a linear path.
Of course.
Right? So as you and I have done, we worked, in jobs we didn't necessarily like.
100%. Building blocks, right?
It's building blocks, right? But have that work ethic, and a work ethic will get you much further in life than, a chance to do your one thing you're passionate about.
True.
But as long as you know when to switch it around.
Yes.
And I think that's key with what you are successful at as well.
100%. I think people, especially like 17 and 19-year-old, they have a passion to be X or Y or Elon Musk or, Gary V or anyone, right? They have that sort of big wild dreams, right? But they're not ready to do the hard yards, right?
Yeah.
And so, people feel ashamed of doing little jobs. I was talking on one of the podcasts, there was another person, and I said, start up a side business, drive a freaking Uber. Like, who cares, right?
Money.
Yeah. Like, who cares, right? Or buy a car and put it on Uber, right? You need to have that mentality of hustle because, no one becomes a millionaire by loving what they do at the start. You know what I mean? You have to start at places that you would hate working, right? But you would get ultimately to a place where you're loving what you're doing and it's actually making you money, right?
Yes.
And so it's an amazing advice. I completely agree and understand as to where this is coming from. So this transition, I know when we talk about, you starting up your business at 16, 17-year-old, buying your first property and then second property at 19, how did the transition into property world happen? Typically, as a mortgage broker and then ethical investing, all of this, how did that what was pivotal around some of these things?
So when I left my last corporate job in 2008, I sold my first business, went to work as a CEO at that company. Didn't work out for me because they ran my company down to the ground. You can't see your baby being run down to the ground, right? So I'm like, I'm out, right? I'm out. And then I decided to move to Perth for a corporate job.
Wow. Well, what were you doing there? What were you doing there?
I was a BDM for an IT firm, for a managed services firm. I was great at selling. By that time, learning how to sell cash registers to someone that had never seen you, et cetera, you learn how to sell. And I was a really good account manager, BDM, right? And so it turns out it wasn't really for me. I left there and I was kind of lost. And then I went to this seminar by this guy called Kintyre, and it turns out they were teaching about the Tony Robbins stuff. I was really into Tony Robbins, right?
Yeah.
I went to my first Tony Robbins event when I was 19. I was like, this guy's like Tony Robbins, but he does financial stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to be part of it. So I remember this. I went up to Lou, who is still one of my best friends. I went up to her and I said, do you guys need any people to work for you in sales? She's like, no, we just hired. I said, I'll tell you what, give me a desk, a phone, and a list, and we'll see if you want to keep me or not.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, because I had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
I had, money coming in from the property. And then I got in and I started, within 3 months, I went from the guy who was whatever to the number one sales guy there.
Nice.
Right. And then I think within 6 months, I was, second in charge of the sales team. And I was then surrounded by this level of wealth I'd never really seen in my life, like yachts, parties, etc. And, I got the opportunity to speak on stage with Richard Branson and got to tour the country with Arnie, right? And that was all while teaching people the mindset of wealth and wealth creation, and also products that they were interested in. Look, some of the things that I bought into everything. So any product I was selling, my rule was I've got to do it first.
Yeah.
And so I bought into products. Some products worked, some products didn't work, and I'd be honest with people and tell them.
Yeah.
And then I saw what they were doing with this thing called land banking.
Yeah.
And you may want to take out some of this podcast because this gets to, what if I could make you enough sales for you to buy your own yacht one day? And I'm like, dude, I can smell the coming off you. Just stop. I'm never selling one of these land bankings ever. I'm out. So I left with $30,000 commission on the table and started up 10 properties in 10 years.
Oh, so that's where it came in. So that was the pivotal moment, basically.
That was the pivotal moment where I saw the stuff they were doing and I'm like, that's not how I'm making my wealth.
Yeah. This is not how it should be.
That's not how the owner of the company is making his money.
Yeah.
Why can't we just do it a way where we show people how we're doing it.
Win-win, yeah.
And I'd kind of already become a bit of a mortgage broker on the side through Dad, because Dad had become a mortgage broker after he sold the first business.
Of course, yeah.
And so I had the mortgage broking and finance background, and I was building my own property portfolio.
It's made sense. Yeah.
Right? I'm like, why don't I just teach people how to do what I do? It's not rocket science.
Yeah, and you know it better than them anyway, right? Because you've been out in the mist, right? So, yeah. Wow.
So that's how 10 Properties in 10 Years was formed, as really, we're talking about the ethical background. It was ethically teaching people to do what I did. And the 10 Properties in 10 Years is a really good hook. In fact, as soon as I started that company, my previous employer tried to take me to court for it.
Really?
Yes, because they claimed they wrote the book. I'm like, well, my company was registered before you published your book, so you can say whatever you want, but you don't own that brand. Right?
Wow, amazing. So typically, if I take you back down the memory lane, of course, there has been good decisions and bad decisions, yeah?
Yes.
And I always ask this question, what are the biggest failures in your life that has made Goro today?
This is a challenging question. I'll tell you why. There's a process we do with Tony Robbins, and those that have done Date with Destiny know exactly what I'm talking about. It's called effective blaming. And effective blaming is you take a story of pain and trauma in your life, and you look at what transpired after that, and you realize that if it wasn't for that pain or trauma, you wouldn't be where you are today. So it's a challenging question to answer. And so where do I start? I mean, some things that I regret, for example, when I was with Jamie and selling stuff for electronic mini transactions in the stock market, in the S&P, etc., or there'd be forex trading. That would work for some people, but it wouldn't work for everyone. And you know what? I realized after literally Dad and I calculated our losses, and we were lucky enough to be able to absorb them. We calculated our losses. We had over $1 million of losses between trading the stock market, shares, as well as investing in olive trees because some random financial planner told us to, right? And we're like, I remember this moment, Dad and I sat down and we looked at the balance sheets. We're like, we've lost a lot of money. But then what sustained us? We're not in a bad financial position or after losing $1 million, right? You think about that like, okay, cool, property is what's keeping us afloat. Why don't we just put more money into property, right? So that was the key moment. I decided that was it. That was the name of the game. That's my effective blaming. After losing $1 million in the stock market, even teaching people how to invest in Forex, I was like, cool, property it is. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to teach people now. Nothing else.
And it's interesting that you say that, right? I think the pivotal moment in everyone's life has to be with the pain that they have, felt, right? And typically, for a lot of people, it's money, right? Them seeing that money disappear, right? You were in a lucky position that, at least, you had diversified at the start of the game, right? A lot of people, they put all of their eggs in one basket and then end up losing and then starting up from ground up. And you see so many horror stories out in the open, right? So it's amazing as to how, the learning process works for a lot of different people. So we've talked about the turning point. We've talked about the switch. 3 key influential peoples in your life. And I know you would say Tony Robbins is one.
Yes.
Probably your dad is, one.
Don't mind, Rita. What are you doing? Moxin Reza's third. No. You're putting that one on the podcast. The third influential person. So, yes, Tony Robbins. I'll elaborate on it. My dad is the number one most influential person in my life. And
100%.
I was invited to contribute to a magazine article for a seniors magazine. And I remember the reporter asked me recently, she said, how often do you speak to your dad even though you don't live with each other? I said, 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
In fact, just today I spoke to him 3 times.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a normal conversation with us. We'll catch up maybe once, twice a week. And she's, oh, wow. I'm like, isn't that what all family relationships are like?
One should be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my dad is my number one influencer in my life. Right. People talk about influencers.
Very important, right? I think, and apologies, I'm cutting you off, but someone said to me the other day that when kids are growing up, their first ideal is not Superman, Iron Man, it's their dad, right? Yeah. They want to copy you, they want to listen to you, they want to see, they want to act like you, right? and they take good and bad at the same time, right? And so you have to be really careful as to how you're influencing them at the same time, right? So,
well, that's my third influence in my life. You've led right into that, right? My son is my third influence in my life. And it's almost a straddling between, if I could just be half as good as dad as what my dad was to me, then my mission here is accomplished.
100%.
And as the saying is, your dad is one of the only human beings that wish you did better than him in life.
100%. That's very true. That's very true.
Yeah, my son is a major influence, right? And of course, Tony Robbins is my second influence. So those are the three influences within my life as people I either look up to or learn from.
Yeah. And it's amazing. I think, I've always felt, and you find commonalities between people who are successful, right? And I always feel that people who run closely knit families become very successful businessmen. I don't know why. I don't understand the mentality. Maybe it's because they're more content in life and money is not the driver. But, I've felt that commonality every time. I interviewed Win, and he runs a really closely knit family. He's very close to that. And that's how I feel as well. A lot of my influencing, typically from my perspective, no one has ever done business in our family at all, ever. Right. And so, taking and going into the business world was almost like me rebelling in my family. Right. But the only person who was there to support was basically my dad. Is like, nah, do it. I want to see, you succeed. Right. And so, people take various different influences, ultimately you need that anchor point in your life. Right. And so true. Right. Your dad is the only person in the world that wants you to do better than them. An amazing saying. It's a heartfelt sort of epiphany, right? That comes to you in the head. That's so true. Let's talk about the NDIS journey and the ethical journey. How did that came into place?
Well, it's an interesting story. So a few things happened all at the same time. I was doing relatively well, financially in life, and I saw one of my friends. He'd always be hanging out with this guy called Richard Branson, right? Richard Branson would wish his mum publicly happy birthday and stuff like that. Like, dude, how are you so close to Richard? And at the same time, there was another story going on where dad's like, hey, in a year's time, we've got 20 properties, all heading from interest only to principal and interest.
Yeah.
That's an extra. Now, look, for one property, people go, oh, shit, I've got to pay extra.
Yeah.
20 properties, that's extra $200,000 income every year we had to magically find.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's a mixture of, commercial, residential, everything. And the commercials were doing well. And so I'll come back to the Richard story because that's important. And then I'm like, I love the returns of commercial, but I love the growth of residential.
Yeah.
I love the cash flow of apartments, but they suck at growth, right? And so I want my thing I needed to look for was like the holy grail.
Yeah.
Commercial returns residential property. And now you and I live in that space now. It sounds really easy, but back 7 years ago, it was impossible, right? And the interest rates were back then what they are now, roughly.
Yeah.
Right. And then going back to my friend, I pick up a phone, go, Ajay, what do you got? Like, can you invite me to hang out with Richard? Like, please. He calls me up one day. This is around about the same time Dad had this conversation with me. And he goes, Goro, I've got an invite to hang out with Richard on his island. I want it. I've got one ticket left.
Yeah.
Like, right? Out of my fridge. Like, hell yes, right? And I remember I was about to hit the donate button to charity because that's what you need to do. You need to donate. Back 7 years ago, you had to donate $15,000 US to hang out with Richard for a week on his island where he'd show up for 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
Right? And the rest of the time, it was networking. I was about to hit the donate button. Then I took a stop. Like, I've already spoken on stage with Richard. What am I going there for? Just a pretty Facebook profile photo?
Yeah.
Or do I really want to connect and be part of that network and that mindset? Because if I'm going to be there for a week and he's only going to be there for 1 or 2 days, I want to know what they talk about. So I pick up the phone to Ajay and said, Ajay, what do you guys talk about on the island? And he said, we talk about a thing called social enterprise. And back then, no one knew what social enterprise or B Corps or all of these other things that have been around for the last few years are about. I'm like, I'm going to find out what social enterprise is. I found out and I realized what it was, and I felt like I would be an imposter if I was in that island, even though I had the financial means. I don't want to be an imposter on the island. I want to go there to connect. That's not authentic, right? And I said I refuse to step foot on the island until I have a successful social enterprise. Now, success to me back then meant 7 figures, and I wrote that down.
Yeah,
successful social enterprise before I go and hang with Richard. And I put it out there in the universe, and I was like, it'll come to me where it needs to happen. 10 properties was kind of doing its thing. We had that, I had to worry about the tsunami of, principal payments that were coming into our lives. And a month later, one of my clients, Nicole, came to me and said, Goro, there's this thing called NDIS that's about to start up, and there's a pathway to build housing, and I've got a resident who's got funding. Can you explore more on how we do it? And she sent me a video at midnight explaining what it was the night before. So I'm like, I've still got the video. We were looking at it the other day, and I'm like, actually, this could be what I'm looking for. And so I delved deeper and deeper and deeper, and there was like no information 7 years ago because NDIS had barely rolled out of Geelong. It was still in its test case in Geelong.
Yeah, very infancy.
Yeah, super infancy, right? And then we looked at it. I put the pieces together along with my colleague, my employee back then, Joe, who used to work for me. And we kind of put the pieces together. Actually, this could be what I'm looking for. This is the social enterprise ahead of us. So we called Nicole back in, showed her all the stuff that we did. She's like, okay, cool, let's start up a company. So we started up a company thinking there'd be a side gig for managing people with disabilities to live in their own homes, maybe have like 5 or 10 properties.
Yeah.
Geez, we were wrong about that. So that company, then we ended up going to market, and Dad promoted it through his network. I promoted through my network. So in the next 6 months, we raised $10 million of personal, friends, and family capital.
Wow. To build them.
To build them, right? And so we were first to market to build, and it was kind of, the best analogy is we were building the plane as it was flying.
Wow.
Right? So no one had ever done a head lease for these things before.
Yeah.
So we had to pay $20,000 to go get a head lease made from lawyers that kind of half knew what they did, and it took 6 months for the lease to be made.
Yeah.
Right? These were the cool things at the start. They're like, holy shit, we don't know. We didn't know for the first few years if we'd ever earn any money from it.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Because no one had ever, outside of a charity, ever lodged an SDA request with the NDIS.
Wow.
Turns out we were one of the very first few to actually do it. So they still, to this day, the quote template for NDIS is based on our original Word document that we sent to the NDIS because they never had a quote template.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so that's how early we were to the place.
And it's amazing like how the work that you've done in the NDIS space. I personally enjoy an ecosystem that you've created around this, right? This is not just about providing the housing, but it's a true win-win scenario that you've created. I truly believe that, and there is a lot of people who are doing a lot of work in NDIS space, right? And
you mean pretending to do something?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
I go on my high horse of
100%, right? And look, and people who have watched me and listened to me, right? I've been quite vocal about NDIS in a negative sense as well, right?
Actually so.
Yeah. And so typically the reason where my nervousness always sits is that, you're playing with the lives of disabled people who deserve the best in their life, right?
Yes.
And so if you are building houses over graves, and God forbid, that's what I'm saying, it's not going to be a good karma, right? And so that's how I felt every time a sales agent came out to me and said, hey, buy this property. And I'm like, nah, right? Truly, because, you don't have an ecosystem. You don't know what you're doing. You have no idea as to how these participations work. All you're doing is taking a cut on this build and basically,
yes.
And, typically every time I would talk to you, I'd be like, well, this guy's doing an amazing work because he has an ecosystem that sits behind him. And so there are participants that are looked after. There is housing that is well qualified in a nicest area, built to basically support these people, right? And so it's a true win-win scenarios that you're creating versus a lot of people that are out there. You see all these Facebook ads saying, get $300,000 or $200,000 in money, and be like, if you are making that sort of money, what is participant getting, right? And
yes.
How are you even supporting them with the support services that they really need by pushing out all of these money to the investors typically, right?
Yes.
So that's where I was quite conflicted always, that, yes, you're creating a win for the investor, but NDIS is not about investors. It's about ethical investing, making sure that participants or disabled people come to the forefront of all of this, right? And so you are building all of these houses in anticipation that there would be more disabled people out in the world, right? Basically, that's how I heard all of these Facebook newses, right?
And so that's why I kept investing in NDIS secret for like 5 years.
Yeah.
Right? Because I didn't want I knew this wasn't a large volume game. And then I saw all these guys starting doing these volumes. I'm like, okay, cool. I've now got to show what we've already done.
Yeah.
Instead of
pioneer, right?
Yeah.
So, you have every right to show how it's done in a proper way,
Yes.
right?
We learned a thing or two, right?
Yeah.
We made the mistakes of going to a volume builder, right? We make the mistakes of modifying a regular house plan.
Yeah.
We made the mistakes and at the start, we had to worry about this last mistake. We were worried about the over-engineering of the house. At the start, we had to worry because we didn't know if it was going to be a regular house or an NDIS house.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you know what? Those were great learnings to have, to focusing I almost liken it to what you do in terms of, rooming accommodation and co-living, where you've got to focus on the end person first.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And just like you can build a rooming house that has 2 bathrooms in it, which, yeah, technically it's a rooming house, but it's not a very good one, is it?
Yeah.
Right? Same way that we build high quality houses that literally today I just finished signing off on some massive luxury upgrades as standard. Like we're doing like upgraded facades, what you'd find out of a really luxury home building. Lighting in the bulkheads, like stuff that you get on these luxury homes.
100%.
Like if a sales agent was off selling it, he'd be like, why the hell are you doing that?
Yeah.
Right?
But I mean, ultimately, these people are going to live there for a very long time, right? And so you want them to feel this like a normal home, right? You don't want them to be just another investment property where they're just making the bare ends meet, right?
Yeah. These are not numbers. These are,
Yeah.
And so there's one thing that I find out in the industry really disgusting, and you almost touched on it. I don't know if you knew about it or didn't, but you've really touched on this. And so a lot of promoters out there are going and saying you can take 100% of the reasonable rent contribution, which comes from the participant through to the SDA provider. And they're like, well, supposedly, right? This is theory. And they're like, okay, because of that, you'll get 180, 200,000 a year or whatever number they want to promote. Because yes, on paper, that would be the maximum you could get.
Yes.
However, RRC, which is the equivalent of 10,000 per participant per year, consists of 2 very important things. One, it consists of Commonwealth rent allowance. Now, if you're like our first participant who acquired a disability later on in their life and already has a property, they're not getting CRA. They're not getting Commonwealth rent allowance.
Yes.
Because they already have assets. They fail the assets test.
Yeah.
Right? They fail the assets test, they've got to pay the CRA out of their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the second component that they get is disability support pension. Now, people with disabilities don't have any form of income apart from a DSP.
Of course. Yeah.
Now, if you're taking 25% of their DSP, the provider's taking 75% for their electricity, food, living expenses. How are they going to live?
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
yeah.
And so I find that behavior disgusting.
And a lot of people are doing that, right? Yeah. Basically that's what's happening out in the industry, right?
So we tell participants, you don't, like, honestly, if you don't need to, if you're not in a position to pay, don't pay us. And we don't pass any of that on to landlords. If we do get paid any of that, they go straight to our retention team who do things like, okay, you want a new garden bed for the house?
Yeah.
Great, we'll buy it for you.
Of course, yeah. And typically, I think there is a big, and I've never said this out in the open, right? I think the biggest problem in NDIS is NDIS.
Yes.
Yeah? Because of the way they put stuff on their website, which is flawed, which people can read and interpret in various different ways without understanding the nitty-gritty around a lot of these things. And so there's a massive education piece that needs to happen at the participation, but also at the NDIS place, right? Because a lot of the stuff that sits on the website looks great on paper, but when you try doing it in reality, it's a completely different story, right?
Exactly. And look, I want to touch on this, which is really interesting. So NDIS recently have factored in risk.
Yeah.
Right? That's why they've increased the rents, but also they're having for example, the rentals out west we'll speak about Melbourne for those that are in Melbourne, out west in Werribee, say, are higher than the rentals out in Lilydale.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot more participant demand in Lilydale than Werribee. And you go, initially I was like, how do those numbers work?
How does that?
And I realized they factored in risk.
Sure.
So, and what people are saying, there's more, they're misinterpreting data saying, there's more people that need it out west.
Yeah.
Well, no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't. NDIS is giving you a risk fee effectively.
Well, you have to build there in anticipation for the demand that will come through there.
That may or may not come, right?
Yeah.
And there's only 6,000, by the way, the data is 6,900 residents across Victoria, across all 4 categories, and only 30% of them are looking for accommodation.
Yeah.
That's nothing. Yeah. Like if you want to de-risk it, speak to yourself and, build a rooming house.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, if you're worried about guarantees and incomes and that's what you do, is what I tell people all the time.
100%. 100%. Wrapping this up, what would Goro say to his old self if he had a chance?
Fuck, we lived a good life.
Are you saying you're not living a good life?
No, what I would say to my old self, like, yeah, we lived a good life. Like, take time to reflect on those magic moments that make life what it is. Because
100%.
even if it's a challenge, as we've talked about earlier, it's a gift that's been provided to us by the universe, God, or
100%.
whatever your belief is, right?
Every adversity that comes into your life, you have to take that as a challenge and convert it into an opportunity. And if you know the art of doing that, then you would always be successful, right? I think people are frustrated because they don't know how to take that adversity in and use one of those magical powers that you are gifted by the God or whoever and change it into an opportunity. There are several ways to do it. I think people just are blind and focused enough to cry out river because that's the easiest way out, right? Ultimately, I heard Simon Sinek say the other day, which was quite beautiful, that what you need to do is not focus on the money. What you need to focus on is improving other people's life, and the money would follow, right? And so, typically that's the mindset that, would always be prevailing the one that wins, So give a shout out, where can people find Goro online, offline? Don't give your address.
Yes.
But where can people find you?
You can stalk me on Facebook. I'm the only one with my name, Goro, Goro. I can't, if there's other copycats out there, I can't blame them, but I'm the only one with my name, Goro. As I say in Hindi, Goro ke liye Goro banna padta hai, right? You'll find me on LinkedIn. That's a really easy place to connect with me because I don't always accept Facebook requests. You can check me out on 10 properties in 10 years, ethical property investments. And if you're interested in SDA, even empowered livability. But the easiest way to connect with me is find me on Facebook or LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Under my personal names.
Now, my parting question, and this is, the user's interest.
Yes.
What's with the mustache? What's the story behind this? Come on, you have to.
I wish there was a really cool story, but it actually, my sister, right, was getting married, and she was getting married in the Gurdwara.
By the way, it looks cool. It looks amazing. I don't know how you swing it, but
I had to go through the ugly phase. So what happened when my sister told me to first start growing it, and she told me like a year in advance, I'm getting married. It's in a Gurdwara. You better look good in a pug, otherwise, for those that don't know what a pug is, it's the turban. And you better look good in a pug, otherwise you're not allowed at my wedding, right? So sister's orders, she's the little big sister. She said, go to the moustache. And so I did, but I've got a problem. I tried to grow a goatee ever since I was a little kid, and I can't connect these two. So I then trained it to naturally grow up, and it kind of stuck around, and I shaved it once, and my wife then said, please grow it back quickly. You look like a 12-year-old. And this was in my 30s, right? You look like a 12-year-old. I'm like, no one wants to hear that in their 30s. So I decided to grow some facial hair to kind of look close to my age.
Looks amazing. Yes. Thank you, brother. Thank you for coming in. And for users, listeners, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to jump in. Amazing episode, a lot of value coming out. I love stories where the mindset has moved you quite significantly in your life. Reach out to me, reach out to Goro if you have any questions. Thank you for listening to us. Stay safe, keep smiling. keep investing. This is Moxin Goro Chengon. Adios.